Hey guys, Brian Beeler here, coming to you with the Storage Review podcast. We've got a good one today, I think, with Dan Williams from Roblox. And for those of you that don't know, Roblox is one of the leading platforms out there for gaming. And kids and adults everywhere have had a tremendous amount of fun with Roblox, not just over the years, but certainly, in the last 6 months as lockdown has caused all sorts of changes in how we do things and how we consume everything from work to gaming. So Dan, thanks for joining the podcast. Great to have you on today.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think there's so much that can be learned from end users. You think of end users differently than I do. I work with mostly large IT vendors, and so customers like you are their end users. You deal with certainly a different type of end user entirely, all these platforms, all these different use cases, but I'm excited to see how you guys have adapted to COVID, to the lockdown, to the surge in your platform. But before we get into all of that, for those that don't know, can you just give us a minute on Roblox and what it is?
Yeah, sure. Roblox is a user-generated content platform, which means that we have a number of gaming experiences, as you alluded to, but every experience on the platform was developed by someone from the community, right? So this community of creators, of external devs who have helped provide millions of experiences on the Roblox platform. Once those platforms are developed, we make them available via just multiple other ways to access iOS, Android, Windows, Xbox, macOS, blah. Once we're published, we make them available to the general internet.
So did you start out just as a technical platform, and where did Game One come from?
That's a good question. Game One came from internal. So I think originally, as we look at the company Roblox itself, it's 15, 16 years old now. It's Dave Baszucki's brainchild, if you will. Originally created for himself for an educational system, which then eventually became a platform as they recognized the idea of leveraging the general community to build experiences, as opposed to Roblox being the builder of experiences, but becoming more of that platform. And then those things over time just really began to take off.
So on the Roblox site, and these numbers may not have been updated recently, but I'll just throw them out there and see what you have to say about it. It says 37 billion hours played since 2008, 3 billion total engagement hours each month, 5.2 million peak concurrent users, and 241 million paid out to developers. I mean, those are some pretty sick numbers. And I don't know, is that peak concurrent accurate, or have you passed 5.2 million?
I would say that peak concurrent is accurate.
Okay,
we are in that realm. We are in that realm. I think that's what's more impressive is the engagement hours. The billions of engagement hours per month is really, really exciting to see.
I think of those 3 billion, my two kids have somehow combined for maybe 250 million of that. I don't know how they would do that in 1 month, but it feels like they have. And it's so funny because, I think we look at a lot of these games and they have a simple feel. They're very approachable, right? Pick it up and go. And I was talking with someone last week about the complexity of a lot of platform games these days. Like when we played Madden back in the day, we had 3 buttons on a Sega Genesis, and you had 3 choices of receivers, and then 3 actions once you had the ball. You couldn't do anything really that complex. And now these games have 38 different buttons and double joypads, and there's so much to them. Not to say that all the Roblox games are all that straightforward, but they're very approachable, which I think lends them themselves well to these giant engagement hours when you can pick them up on almost any platform, as you said, and just go. I mean, is that a fundamental principle to the platform?
Yes, I think ease of use, ease of engagement are just natural to Roblox as an experience platform. I have a bunch of kids as well. I have kids in the demographic, and I watch how easy it is for them to pick these things up. You alluded to Madden. I too played a lot of Madden back in my day. And watching my kids not only play but also develop their own little games and or experiences using Studio, which I just think is a great opportunity for them. As if this was something available in my time, I'm sure I would have probably fallen into tech much sooner than when I did. Yeah.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, spend a minute on Studio too, because I think you guys are doing a really great job of it. Obviously, it's your business model, so you're incentivized to do it, but providing tools to not just developers, but to kids. I mean, little kids to be able to go in there and move objects around and create things. And I know there's some summer camp style education, concepts out there. Minecraft has been doing a pretty good job of that too, with Microsoft sort of pushing out the education message of how to manipulate objects and move things around. That's got to be, it's great for kids to engage in that, but that's got to be something where you guys have seen an uptick as well during this last couple months.
Yeah, I think in the time that I've known of Roblox and the feedback that I receive from peers either in the space or not, and or friends who have kids as well, is really that educational component. A number of my friends and their kids and my kids have spent time in these camps. I think we hear a lot about it at Roblox, where you have Roblox being used as a component of education during school, which is great, right? Like we've experienced it where even our own kids' tech teacher is sharing Roblox and having kids do things as well. I think as we start along this idea that like Roblox is just a gaming platform, we forget how important it is as a developer platform as well, which enables anyone who has access to a computer on the internet to develop an experience, right? So you no longer have to be a studio to develop a game or experience. And I think what Roblox has done is they've really expressed the ability to build these experiences through frictionless ways, right? Where it's super easy to get on the platform and build something that is enjoyable. And we will continue to expand upon that as well.
So have you developed a IT data center game that where you manage your workloads and decide which ones to ship off to the cloud, or is that too close to real life?
It's funny that you say that. We have joked about that internally. We have not done this yet. But when you hear Dave speak about the metaverse, these things absolutely are possible, where we're building systems automation, et cetera, to manage our compute, whether it's native or third party. Imagine if we could do this through a Roblox experience as well, where you can go boot a new node, tear down an old node. Yeah. That'd be
pretty sick, actually, if you have instead of all these fancy dashboards and GUIs that we look at from IT vendors and guys like SolarWinds and whoever to manage this, we should be doing it through Roblox. Plug in your APIs to S3 and GCP and Azure and whatever you want, and manage your workloads through. That could be something. Maybe we'll work on that.
We're going to throw that on the roadmap. I think that's great. We are constantly looking to build systems automation to reduce the repetitive jobs that we might have, right? And as I alluded to just a few minutes ago, like we think of Roblox as this metaverse, where we should be able to do anything. In fact, we should be able to do this call through Roblox where you and I are just in our avatars communicating in real time.
We tried that with Second Life, didn't we? Have that.
Yeah.
This would need to be a little better, though, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it will.
Gosh, yeah, that was a great Office episode with Dwight running around in Second Life. Gosh, that's a good show. So I want to dig into two things. First being sort of your approach to infrastructure. What are you guys doing? How are you doing it? And then how you've responded to the surge in traffic that I presume you've had over the last 6 months. So let's start out with what you have or what you were doing before, and maybe go there. I assume based on your LinkedIn profile, you're all about hybrid cloud, but what does that mean to you? How are you guys breaking down workloads between cloud and on-prem, and just what's the overall infrastructure look like?
Yeah. Okay.
I know it's a big question.
No. It's great. I have this narrative that I give either in when I'm interviewing someone and they're sort of interested in my background, or as I'm just talking to folks. So I think I'll just go through that here if that's cool.
Yeah, maybe I'll get a job by the end of this.
Yeah. So I was approached June of 2017, had no idea what a Roblox was, even though I had kids and the demographic. But when I came to meet them and sort of tried to understand what they were about, I met the CTO at the time and I asked him, hey, like, what keeps you up at night? And he was like, oh, well, like we have this one facility in Chicago where we run a lot of our back-end workloads. And then all of our game serving is 100% third party. And we have a bunch of reliability events and a bunch of security events, but we're growing. And I was like, oh, like that's really interesting. Like you have a bunch of reliability and security events, but you're growing, right? So cool. So I joined later in September of 2017, and in my first week, I experienced some pretty big outages. And there was a human who was responsible for a lot of the internal orchestration, if you will. And they had just gone on vacation for the first time in years. And of course, they go on vacation and we have this huge outage. And I asked, like, hey, do we have access to centralized logging, right? Like I was the new human in the room, and they're like, no, we don't have that here. Like you have to log into every server and try to figure it out. And I was like, holy wow, okay, cool. Like, cool. Like,
well, wait a minute, but to be fair, I mean, you're asking questions that were native to you,
right?
Because we didn't discuss it yet. But you came from what, enterprise apps or whatever with Dropbox, and then before that, what, Facebook or something too?
Right.
So you had some experience in sort of big boy management of applications.
I had some experience at, I'd say, large scale places. So that's sort of what drew me here was, here was a company that was 12 to 13 years old. They were growing. They hadn't really had experience yet from humans who had been at large scale places, which really is just experience. It's just that, like, you either go through it or you don't. It's really hard to read about it or learn without going through it. So that's sort of what sparked my interest in Roblox, because I had this crazy idea that if we could improve reliability and performance, we could probably see the user base grow even more, right? And we could probably see the company become even more successful, right? And these are just some of the lessons that I think I learned at early Facebook, and like took with me to Dropbox and now to Roblox. So one of the first things that I did in that Q4 of 2017 was I went to board and I asked for funding to build out our own infrastructure. And what that meant was we were going to build out enough infrastructure on the edge to manage all of our game servers ourselves, because what we were experiencing were daily outages of our game servers that were managed by third-party vendors, which again, just going back to my past, ultimately, if you can control the flow to your application, if you can own the network, control the flow to your application, you would probably have a greater ability to ensure a reliability in perf, right?
Okay.
I talk about these things where I have this equation that I've built out over time, which is essentially reliability is greater than performance is greater than cost. And really all that means is if we're not up, what's the point? If we're not fast, they're probably not going to stay. And then if we're not sustainable, we're probably not going to make it, but we're going to use cost as the third lever, and we're going to prioritize reliability over perf over cost.
So that's an interesting point, because I think as you in Q4 of 17, I mean, cloud's fully out there and available and covers, because you guys are global. I think that's the other consideration, is that you're not just talking about the US, you've got Europe and Asia, you've got everything.
Right.
So did you, at that point, you're talking about building out infrastructure, did you think about going all cloud and just distributing on Amazon or several clouds of your choice?
Yeah, in fact, we were debating during that quarter whether we should just go all in on cloud or build on our own. And again, just going off of my own experience and some of our experiences from folks that we hired from places of scale, we knew building out our own edge would be the ultimate for reliability and perf, and then leveraging third-party cloud in a hybrid way to manage workloads that were still needed to be reliable, but yes, less impacting on the end user. So we went to board, asked for funding to go build out enough infrastructure in Asia, Americas, and Europe to at least take on 50% of game serving by the end of 2018. And then followed up with that by the end of 2019 to support 100% of game serving, which we're now responsible for. Any experience on the platform that's being played is now 100% played on native Roblox infrastructure, distributed across nine countries, 20 or so locations, 17 or 20 or so nodes across 17 cities in Asia, Americas, and Europe. And we're continuing along that investment where we have proven, in a sense, the hypothesis of, hey, if we can control our flows, if we can improve reliability and performance of game serving, we will see stickiness to the platform improve. We will see more users, et cetera, which will only just help the company long term, right? Like Roblox is free to play. We do have an economy, of course, and the devs work through that in terms of their experiences, and Roblox pays out some amount to devs who exchange dollars for Robux, or to devs who hit certain engagement hours. But what we learned was we started seeing, or we started to hit metrics that we didn't expect. For example, in Q4, we hit concurrency numbers that we didn't expect, or at least we didn't predict or project. And what we learned was it was the direct result of improved reliability and improved perf, which was awesome. We started hitting numbers in January that we didn't expect to hit until Q4 of 20 and or Q1 of 21. So now we were really far ahead in terms of the trajectory of growth. And then you mentioned it earlier, shelter in place really had an impact where, not that we were bursting at the seams of like new traffic, but what we recognized was that audience that was generally using the platform over the weekends was now using the platform every day. Every day was like a new peak day, or was just like a peak concurrent day. And as you watched sort of the regions, the countries that were going on lockdown, you would sort of see this natural flow, and where you'd have a spike in traffic from Italy, or you'd have a spike in traffic from Japan or India or the Americas, and like, this is great, right? So Now, all of a sudden, we've gone from, hey, we're supporting Roblox as a service, which is unlocking this platform and enabling others to play together globally. That, hey, like there's a lot of like families now that are depending on Roblox. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of kids that are at home that are like stuck inside. They're like, hey, like I want to hang out with my friends, and now they're hanging out with their friends on Roblox more than they normally would because that was their outlet, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So this interesting model then of kind of doing your own thing at the edge, and then we'll talk to the cloud. I assume bursting to the cloud when you need, but what does the infrastructure look like then? Because it seems, we've seen like content delivery networks placing nodes in even in communities in some cases to be able to get the top 20 movies or whatever real close to the homes that consume them. Now you probably aren't going to that level, but you are really distributing your content on a global basis and trying to get it close to the end users. What does that look like from I don't know how much you want to talk about hardware or networking or storage or compute, but just some perspective there would be great.
Yeah, sure. So we started with a simple model that we were going to attack all of these major internet gateways across the globe first, right? So we did that. We built a dedicated backbone. So we're running a service provider like network. We distributed compute within all of those nodes, and we leverage our matchmaking system to basically plant the end user as close as possible to a node. We generally want to be within 15 milliseconds of every major metro. So we started there, and then we're extrapolating out. You can imagine that there are other large third-party cloud vendors that might be within these same gateways, or they might be within these same regions. So when we look at the hybrid cloud strategy, we essentially work to interconnect with them in every major region that we can. So if we do run into an inrush of traffic and or a surge, we could then burst in third party and not have to think about the capital investment or the time it takes to get new servers deployed. Of course, we use third-party cloud for backend services, storage, database, blah, because that's not our focus right now. But with our model, assuming we interconnect with as many third parties as we need to in like regions, we believe we can provide the best experience to the end user, where I talk about this simple idea around the Costco effect, if you will, where as an end user, let's say I'm in Australia and I go to Singapore to get my content, I can go there and I can get my game content, I can get my data, I can get everything from that single node, as opposed to, I'm gonna go get parts of it in Singapore, and then I'll go get these other parts of it in the US or these other parts of it in Hong Kong. So the idea is to try to distribute as much as possible to and through the edge, so that we can really just improve the reliability and perf of that experience, where we're not jumping all over the place. And then from an orchestration standpoint, right, like I think sometimes when you have this native environment and this third-party environment, you have to treat these things separately and you have to manage them separately. But we're basically working on systems, tools, automation, where we orchestrate compute and what have you natively the same way we would orchestrate that compute in third party, so that it relieves the operational complexity in terms of managing these things. So where we ultimately, the vision is to manage these things in a way that we really don't have to think about it. If it's, is this native? Is this third party? Is this blah? It's like, it doesn't matter. It's just compute that's near the end user. And let's just ensure that they have the best experience possible.
So break that down a little further, because you said you use cloud resources for storage. I imagine your storage footprint's relatively predictable. It certainly doesn't ebb and flow the way your user access would. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And then the matchmaking is probably the next biggest thing, right? Because you've got all these experiences or games that these users are coming to. But if you've got thousands of games, how do you distribute those to all of these nodes across the world? I mean, that seems like a tremendous logistical challenge.
Yeah. So matchmaking, which my group is not responsible for, but we work really close with this team, essentially works off of this idea that if you and I are playing a game and we are within some proximity to an edge node, our matchmaking system is going to spin up that game in that node, and you and I will play it. If we have more friends who also want to play with us, who want to play the same game, they will then be shifted to that node as well. So we're all doing this in real time. This goes back to our game service, which is proprietary Roblox, which is a proprietary Roblox application, which is ultimately just responsible for spinning up and spinning down these experiences within the nodes. My team is explicitly responsible for the orchestration of how these things are spun up. Just know that we run a containerized Linux environment where we have an orchestrator essentially within our matchmaking system that then works with the container orchestration to spin these experiences up.
Yeah, well, I was going to go there next because as you're talking about these sort of destructive instances that are alive for it's sort of ephemeral, right? Because they spin up while we're playing the game and then we all sign off and there's no need for it to be there anyway. So that's, if not the ideal use case for containers, then I don't know what is. But you couldn't have started on containers. What was that? The transition was before you, but do you have any insight as to what that was like, and then what you've learned since moving to containerized platform?
No, that's great. And the transition was not before me, which is super.
Oh, okay.
When I started, all of our game serving was third party. It was all bare metal images, which we would essentially ship over these bare metal images to these third party suppliers, and then they would just run our experiences for us. And matchmaking would still spin them up as needed. So in 2017, around the same time that I started, another couple of humans started around the same time as we started to build this thing out. And one of the focuses immediately was, as we're going to fund and build out this big distributed network that's going to supply game serving compute, how do we modernize this thing so that we're not relying on bare metal instances across the globe? So let's take the approach to containerize if we can. The majority of our environment was built on Microsoft Windows. So as we built this thing out, we wanted to ensure that it was as flexible as possible while leveraging open source. So we used our edge deployment as a gym, if you will, to build the muscle for building a containerized Linux microservice, which would eventually then be used within the data center as well. So it was a really aggressive timeline, because as we started to build this thing out originally in 2018, we launched our first node, April of 2018. This was just a bare metal Windows node and just looked a lot like what we'd already done on third party. So we started to do the work, and we eventually transitioned by Q4 of 18 to 100% of our native fleet was containerized Linux, which was awesome for us because we could do a bunch more just within operating the environment. And by the end of 19, as we moved the majority of our fleet to ourselves and eventually got everything onto ourselves, by the end of 19, 100% of our fleet was containerized Linux. A lot of challenges because you had a service that is responsible for our game serving that was built in one way, which then had to be rebuilt in real time as we were deploying this. But it was a huge effort, cross-org effort, which basically helped set us up for the future of modernization in terms of containerization here at Roblox, which has now evolved into moving services within our core data centers to this modern architecture as well.
If you had not have made that change, do you think you guys would have taken the lockdown surge as well as you did?
Absolutely not. It is much easier to spin up and to grow your quotas leveraging containers than it is spinning up new bare metal machines, right? Like the idea of bin packing and or just packing more compute within a large bare metal system versus leveraging a large bare metal system in a single instance just does not scale well, right? So as we were going through some of these surges, you would see certain teams say, "Oh, I need X more compute," and you'd see the orchestration team say, "Do it, spin it up, great. Like, you have the keys to do this. The compute's available. Double the fleet if you need to," right? Which just increased our flexibility around availability, right? And it was great.
Yeah, now that you have it, you wouldn't have it any other way. But that process must have been pretty killer to go from bare metal Windows to containers. I just can't even imagine how. Well, that took you what, a year and a half or so to make that transition?
It took us a full year as we were planning because we started in Q4 17, just in terms of the build out. We didn't get anything launched until Q2 of 18, but by Q4 of 18, the migration of 50% of game serving was on-prem and now being served by containerized Linux. I'll say the human involved, Rob Cameron, you'll see a bunch of podcasts out there that he's done where he spent a lot of time ensuring he wasn't the only human, obviously, but he was the human who was driving the effort, and he and a bunch of others, I would say, took some much needed time off after the project was completed because it was just a race, if you will, to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, if you were developing Roblox today, it wouldn't even be a question. You would just start there, right? And that's been kind of the thing with the latest modern apps that we've been talking about. But containers for probably 3 or 4 or 5 years at this point. We've been going to KubeCon and some of those events, and to watch the growth of those events is just insane. From a couple people in a room to, I think they had 12,000 last year, and hopefully they'll have a live event again soon. But the adoption there is just off the hook, right? Because that's the easiest way to have these infrastructures quickly deploy, do their thing, and then move on. But there's still, in the broader enterprise, there's still a lot of reluctance to go to containers. Did you meet any pushback when you were going through this?
No. It seemed as though everyone was willing and ready. I think it would have been something Roblox would have done earlier if they had the time and the humans to do it. I don't really think we started investing as much into the engineering on the infrastructure side until 2017, right? When Roblox really started to see that, okay, infrastructure matters. It's not just adding a bunch of servers and or getting things from third party. You actually have to manage this stuff too, because now it's gone from hundreds of nodes to thousands of nodes, if not tens of thousands of nodes, which are just unmanageable from a manual standpoint, unmanageable without the right automation and or the right teams in place. So I think as Roblox began to look for new humans to come in, they looked at the opportunity to scale. And that's one of the things that we think about a ton. It's not how do we get through next week, how do we get through next month, how do we scale 10x, right? How do we scale as a company? How do we scale infrastructure? How do we scale the platform and the rest of engineering? And so they were bought in, I would say, to looking at ways to scale all the things. So when a number of us began to join and began to come up with other ideas around scaling, it was an automatic like, yes, we should do these things. These things make sense, especially as we leverage again the rubric of this will make it more reliable, this will make it more performant, and this will make it more efficient. We talk about engineering efficiency a ton, where our whole purpose is not to do a bunch of these things manually, right? Like, what can we do to automate things? What can we do to simplify our workflow to create these workloads? We're still growing. We're still going through growing pains. We're still hiring. There's a bunch more to do there, but a lot of support to scale. And I think it all comes back to, it took a good 2 years to get going, but we saw the fruit in 2 years. Just going back to the scale that we saw, the stickiness, and then the ability to scale up during shelter in place without the need of buying a bunch of new hardware or doing a bunch of other things, just by leveraging the compute that we already had.
So that's where I'm glad you said that. I want to go there next, but I do want to come back to some of the software issues. But from everything you're saying about where your bottlenecks are, if we think about the network that you've established, the cloud resources that you're using, ultimately, these nodes have to have enough compute power and connectivity to make them useful for however many thousand users you can fit on a node. So do you guys, someone in your org somewhere along the way, I don't know if it's you, has got to be looking at all of the technologies available to you, whether it's Intel or AMD, or it's networking cards and NICs, or if it's full-blown servers. And I'm curious too, because of your background at Facebook is notorious for being part of the Open Compute project and open sourcing a lot of these designs they've used. And the hyperscalers have gotten compute down to, even though they're still managing physical boxes, there's commodity as it gets in a lot of ways, where there are parts that you don't need in a data center or a hyperscale server that you would need in the enterprise are missing. Like, they're just not, they're not there to save another couple points on build costs. What, from the compute node standpoint, I'm really curious to see what you can share there in terms of, how you guys think about that, what you're looking at, where the benefits are to your overall infrastructure.
Yeah. So I was certainly at Facebook when OCP was established. I worked really closely with Jonathan Heiliger, who was a big core component of that. He was my VP at the time. So we take a lot of those lessons with us, right? Like, we don't always need this extra thing. We don't have to pay for that thing or this thing. But I would say 2007 to 2010, a lot of that was really that there was a lot of waste, right? And Facebook and others continue to sort of like squeeze as much as they can out of their resources. So again, we'll take those lessons with us. We certainly did very similar things at Dropbox, where we were building our own hardware platforms along the lines of supporting our needs. And we're certainly working with a lot of those same vendors, I would say, here at Roblox. But we're still very early in that timeline. Tens of thousands of nodes versus hundreds of thousands or millions of nodes are two or three different things. But I will share, like, when we started on this journey, we started with Intel V4 boxes as we really hadn't understood our workloads yet on the game serving side. Eventually went to Intel V5, was able to double the concurrency per node, which was great at like a meaningful cost. And then more recently, all of, I'd say the last 4 edge nodes that we have built are completely built on EPYC Rome technology, which again doubled our ability to serve end users. So essentially, we're just packing more into a box, and we continue to evaluate everything that's in the market that's coming out. We have a small bare metal eng team who focuses on that explicitly. We have nodes across the globe where we ship certain platforms to just to experience what it would be like to have this in it versus that. So we are testing in production, if you will. We've gone from on the networking side where we started with just buying 10 gig, or leveraging a bunch of 10 gig across the board, both from an ingress egress standpoint as well as a host standpoint, to where now we're using 25 gig NICs on the nodes, and we're leveraging multiple 100 gigabit edge interfaces to support ingress egress across the globe. So continue to expand, because everything's just sort of a multiplier, if you will. The more that you can get out of a compute node, the more network that you'll generate, which just means that we're now starting to pack more nodes into a certain power footprint, but we're getting more out of them. So we'll continue to evolve that. We do work with our vendors to sort of strip down or strip out things that we don't yet need. We're not yet to the point of just supporting motherboards on a shelf.
Sure.
And I don't know when and if we get there, but with a lot of the work that the other large scale companies have done, it's really helped, like everyone in the community who buys hardware, right? Where if this were 2010, I think we'd be spending a lot more in compute, but thankfully it's not. So we're spending a lot less, also based on our experience and knowing how to evaluate and get the best out of our compute and network.
Yeah, well, I think you guys are coming at it from a really pragmatic, utilitarian standpoint, right? Is that in this 1 or 2 U of space, I can fit X amount of users. And if I swap this CPU for this one, I can get, X times, 1.2 or whatever the number is, right? And then you evaluate the cost per user, per node, and you figure it out that way, which makes sense. AMD has done a fantastic job with a lot of their newest CPUs. Certainly the second generation feels like it's for real, and we're looking at it through a different lens than you are. But in the servers that we're seeing from Dell, Lenovo, those mainstream guys, really, really nice performance profiles. So it's no surprise that with all that extra computational power that you guys would see some density growth there. If you're talking about that in your last couple nodes, for you, what does a node mean? Is that just a location? Is that a set number of racks in you? What is that to you?
Yeah. It's a location. It is a location that basically has a count of compute, a count of racks, a count of networks capacity. At this point, I would say that we started off with the initial funding of building 8 rack nodes, where we'd probably get a couple hundred compute servers in. Now we're looking at sort of multipliers of that around 4 to 5x, where we're building larger edge nodes, if you will, that may support millions of concurrency.
Okay.
And we're now evolving to the standpoint of we'll continue to build in large internet gateways, but then we'll start to expand outside of large internet gateways where we're leveraging cheaper space and power. So pay for the networking connectivity that you need within these tier 1 internet gateways, and then find proximity in terms of space and power where you can really build up a bunch of capacity to support game servers or any other compute that we want to run on the edge. So we're certainly evolving there, and you look at this as a way to start to become a bit more efficient on the cost side. As we really didn't account for this early on, it was just a matter of like, let's get up, let's get going, let's prove that we can be more reliable and performant in this way. But now, as the things are becoming larger, we are evaluating costs across the board.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask, because as you look at a global expansion plan, it may not be a trivial ask to find affordable space to go snag 10 or 20 racks of gear. I mean, that's not insignificant. So that's got to be a pretty big challenge. And then, you talked about some of the orchestration bit on containers. I want to revisit that for a moment, because I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of orgs face is, okay, well, if we go do the container thing, great. Now, how do we manage it? Do we write these things ourselves? Do we use, there's thousands of tools out there now, it seems, to help manage and provision and do all of this sort of thing. So how much of it from the software side did you guys create, versus are there tools that you can talk about that you guys like that are helping sort of grease the skids on that process? What's going on there?
Yeah, you alluded to Kubernetes earlier. We are not a Kubernetes shop, at least not yet. We decided, considering what we needed to do, we started off with HashiCorp, and we're basically a Hashi stack. So whatever they have to offer, we are leveraging, and it has been great. For us, we start with a small team, I think, as I alluded to earlier, and it just things like Nomad from an orchestrator were just much easier to get out the gate than trying to build on something like Kubernetes from the get-go. So we are in that camp of the Hashi stack. Now, do we plan to build our own orchestrator, or do we plan to do anything else long term? I think that's where we look at what is the opportunity cost to sort of build an abstraction layer, if you will. So my team is working on this now, where we're building an abstraction layer that will create enough likeness of an orchestrator that has its own APIs, but then removes the requirement for those using it to be experts within orchestration land or within like an idea of a container or what have you. So we're working to make access to compute as simple as turning on a light, right? So my team is working on a in-house software development project, which essentially abstracts away our orchestration layer and then builds into it, security management, secret management, telemetry, decision making around which region this thing should be deployed, decision making around should it be deployed in third party or native, where the consumer of the interface doesn't have to really think as much about, I need this to be in third party cloud, or I need this to be in a Roblox native edge. Instead, it's like a simplified software interface that essentially you ask for resource, you get resource, and baked in our telemetry, our secret management, all the things that you need to run your application. That then ties back to what the platform team does in terms of like where they're building their own software tooling system to build and release applications, which then takes advantage of our infrastructure interface, which is essentially just infrastructure as a service, right? Again, just trying to simplify so that platform teams and our product teams don't necessarily have to become SREs and or have to, like understand deeply in terms of what a quota is or how a container runs, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, how a container runs and some of those other finer points are important when you're looking at cloud providers to fill in the gaps or offer, some of the things like storage services. Are they created equal at this point in their ability to support you from that perspective, or are some better than others? Just what are you thinking about there as you're evaluating cloud partners, whether it's domestically here in the U.S. or throughout the world?
Yeah, so we certainly have a relationship with cloud providers, with public cloud providers. We evaluate what is easiest for us to manage,
Okay.
and what either works or resembles our current workflow and our workloads within our native environment. I'm expressing some amount of ambiguity here on purpose, but what we are working to do is, let's say that there's the big three. We are working to be able to leverage all three of them, because in certain regions you might not find one, right? So we have this idea of not being locked in, not being locked into anything or anyone. So how do we simplify our workloads enough to where we can use either of the three in any region that we would need, and then how are we able to manage it with our own software and tooling? So I think a lot of the primitives are there. If you look at either of the three, I think all of them know what they're doing. I think one certainly has the market, and I think we are finding that others are capable. But again, we won't make a decision based on cost. So it'll all come down to reliability and perf. We have relationships with all three. So we continue to work through those things.
Well, it's interesting because, you've consistently said that the reliability for you guys is and then performance are the most important things, because you've found those to be direct analogs to the overall business.
Right.
And from the cloud standpoint, this is interesting because in the enterprise world, the message is always about cost on cloud. And we talk about it all the time, tiering to the cloud because, blob object storage is less expensive than putting another flash array on-prem, or, if Amazon's instance is expensive for whatever reason in your region, tools to enable you to go to IBM or GCP or Azure, whatever it is, right? It's a lot about workload portability, mobility, but almost every single time cost is not three like it is for you. It's one or two. So you guys are approaching the cloud thing from a totally different angle. That's somewhat curious, because I did want to go next to is cloud, how you guys in the containerized space are perfect fit for this cloud mobility concept. But is that something you're doing? And it sounds like probably not, that you're finding providers you like in certain regions and they're your go-to guy.
Well, cloud mobility is absolutely where we're going. And
okay.
Cloud mobility to us means it can run within our native cloud, or it can run in any third party. So if we build a container a certain way, right? If we build an application a certain way, it should be flexible enough to where it can run anywhere, right? And if we orchestrate it ourselves, then that is sort of our magic sauce, right? Then we're only constrained to understanding the definitions that are leveraged within these third parties, right? And how do we match them to meet our needs? So where we may regionally be tied into one location or one provider, depending on their availability, globally, we would want to orchestrate these things in sort of a transparent, seamless way, meaning it could be in provider one versus provider two versus native, and no one would know the difference. Now, the only delta there, or the only thing I would push back on, is from our experience at other large scale places, having complete control of your network and your flows is absolutely your competitive advantage when you're not able to ensure the most performant route or the most performant or reliable path for an end user when you're using third party on the edge, which is why we've taken the hybrid approach of 100% of our edge should be native. We will build in the burstability to leverage third party, because that will unlock us and enable us to be a lot more flexible. But we will primarily leverage our own network, edge compute, and data centers in regions that make sense to do so. But for other things that we don't have a presence, or for other services that we can't offer on our own, maybe we'll take advantage of blob storage, or a distributed database, or a message bus, just to take advantage of those things, because those are not yet our core competencies.
That's interesting, and I think a lot of the stuff that you're figuring out as you go. Have you found many roadmaps to look at as you've progressed through this, or are you guys trying and trial and erroring your way through it? Because you talked before about on the hardware side, running your own POCs to see what works. I assume that applies to everything else, be it cloud or your own nodes or anything else you're evaluating, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We just compare and contrast. Going back to our days in third grade when we'd have to read a story and then write about it, we're just doing the same thing with tech, right?
Hopefully, you're writing about it at higher than a third grade level.
Right. You've caught on to the pragmatic approach. I really do try to simplify a lot of these things down to problem statements, where we focus on problem statements first and then we figure out tech next. Versus, I think what others might do is they get caught up in tech and they talk a lot about tech first, as opposed to truly understanding like the problems that they're trying to solve. And I just try to simplify in that way, because it removes a lot of, I think, the emotion around, oh, we're going to go third party, or, oh, we're going to go native, or I don't think these things are binary. I think they're nuanced. And I think we have to express that in some way. And I think the only way that we express that is we try to understand the problem statement first. I think a lot of times too, folks fail to remember that a lot of these things have either been solved at some point or haven't yet been solved to meet your own need. And you might not have solved it yet either. And it's been years of this. It's okay that it's going to take another year or 2 or 3 to actually solve, right? Because it's already not solved. It doesn't mean you have to like waste everything right now to go solve it. So just taking the pragmatic approach, the objective approach, like the way that I sort of evaluate things for at least my group within Infraland is, what are the top 5 things that we're trying to solve over the next 12 to 36 months, and just work backwards. Where I think ideally, I would say we would operate everything ourselves. But again, I think that's too stringent. I think that's too strict. I think third-party cloud, like there's a reason that it exists, and they may have the same challenges as us at times with respect to having enough capacity in certain regions, et cetera, which is why this idea of fluidity or mobility across your workloads just being distributed across third-party versus native really is, I think, the best format.
Well, that's interesting, because before February, March, you knew Saturday was going to be your day, and it would be pretty easy, relatively, I say that as not the tech guy, but relatively easy to say, it's Saturday, we need to scale our cloud provider partners by 15% to help adjust for the surge. And then, as you saw Saturday, every day turning into Saturday, the programmatic response there is a little bit different. And I'm sure you've got some dynamic tools to help you do that. But what happens when you scale into your cloud provider and maybe you start to hit their edge? I think you just started to talk about that. Not that you could single-handedly take down Amazon. I don't know, maybe you can in a region, but that's a whole different challenge of having them meet your reliability standards. How do you square that?
Yeah, so we certainly run into situations on the weekend or on other days where we do hit quotas, and we have to work with them to sort of unlock us, if you will. I think this goes back to our system that we are trying to build and create to where we can move workloads around, while also focusing on how are we able to strip as much out so that we're not so dependent on proprietary technologies. We're far from that. We are super dependent on things that third parties provide us. We're super dependent on things that we're running in-house. And we're not yet to a point where we just have this ubiquitous compute that can just be anything at any time. But I don't think that's unlike anyone else. I think a lot of folks who run large internet environments are operating in this way with this sort of vision of everything is created equal and treated equally and managed equally, where you can move these workloads around dynamically and sort of auto-magically. We're certainly not there. We will be in time, right? When will we be? I don't know. I don't have a timeline there. I don't have a vision that we can work off of from other places, because I also think that Roblox is very different from other places that I've been. Gaming itself is one thing, right? So we have this like real-time 3D physics engine, game engine running on the edge. We have you and I that might be distributed in different regions of the world, and we're playing on the same server, which then means like we have to have like the near real-time experience. And then we have like the social graph, all these other things involved. So how do we manage it in a way that's not so static, right? So I think that's ultimately our vision, which is how do we build the software tooling, the system to help us automagically spin up things, spin down things as needed, both in third party and native, where we can make the most efficient use on the cost side, by not impacting reliability and perf. That's sort of the challenge here, right? How do we ensure the most reliable experience, the most performant experience at the most efficient cost possible, but never degrading reliability and perf?
I feel like you probably have, I can't see your arms, a tattoo, one on each shoulder that says reliability, another one has performance on that. Your company meetings must be fantastic, where we know reliability and performance. Dan, come on.
I get jokes every now and then from folks where like other C-suites will be doing a talk and they'll say something along the lines like, "What does Dan always say?" And it's like, I learned a long time ago, if I just keep saying the same thing over and over again, it will eventually sink in.
Well, so we spent a whole lot of time talking about your infrastructure, but we neglected to cover off on any games. So in your parting shot here, I know my kids play a lot of Jailbreak, and then something about a pizza simulator or some such. What's going on in the Williams household? What's the number one game over there that our listeners should check out?
Yeah, I don't think it's a secret when we talk about Adopt Me as being one of the like most amazing experiences that one will have on Roblox. My kids also do the pizza experience. They do Jailbreak as well. Piggy has really been fun too. And Piggy just started this year, and it's really grown. So that's sort of the neat thing when you see these experiences like Jailbreak, which was like the number one experience for a long time. Adopt Me came out of nowhere, it seemed, and then now Piggy, and there's a whole bunch of other experiences.
Gosh, I don't even know what Piggy is. I guess I'm getting a little behind. I assume it involves some sort of pig?
Yes.
All right. Well, I've really appreciated this conversation, and I think you need to come back in a year and tell us how you've knocked all 5 of those things off your list, and what the next 5 are for your development strategy.
I love it. Yes. It's been great, Brian. Thanks.
Loved having you on, Dan.
This is my first podcast, by the way, so I just want to say thanks for breaking me in.
We're pretty gentle. Thanks for doing it.